Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives on the final Friday before people actually vote. The Iowa caucuses come on Monday, the New Hampshire primary just 8 days later. So a very important debate Thursday night in Des Moines. We all know Trump wasn't there. We'll get to that in a little bit. But there were still some important moments. A lot of folks believe it was not the best night for Ted Cruz, and we'll certainly get to that in the second martini. I would suggest it wasn't a great night for anyone, but Ted Cruz did have a good moment. And Jim, you've pointed out in the Jolt and on Twitter that this was actually not only a well-articulated answer, but kind of a moment of courage for Cruz. And we've talked about this before. Chris Wallace asked him about his opposition to the renewable fuel standard and ethanol mandates in a state where they're very popular, like Iowa. Here's what Cruz said.
We should be developing oil and gas and coal and nuclear and wind and solar and ethanol and biofuels. But I don't believe that Washington should be picking winners and losers, and I think there should be no mandates and no subsidies whatsoever. And indeed, my tax plan that I've introduced, it's available on our website. It's a simple flat tax for everyone. It'll produce enormous economic growth, and it eliminates every mandate, every subsidy, so there's no subsidies for oil and gas, no subsidies for anyone. I have introduced legislation that would phase out the ethanol mandate over 5 years, but that is in the context of having no mandates whatsoever for anyone. And I would note there's a much more important government regulation to ethanol, and that's the EPA's blend wall.
And he says he would tear that down. So, Jim, we'll see if there are exit polls Monday night, whether this issue makes a big deal for him one way or the other. But to go into Iowa and not bow down to the sacred cow there, pretty impressive, especially in a state where he has to win.
Yeah, and let's observe. What is the easiest way to go into Iowa and win some votes? I love ethanol. Ethanol is terrific. I drink a glass of ethanol for breakfast every morning, right? Everybody should have corn in their cars. Everybody should have more corn in their cars, more subsidies, more mandates, more or less paraphrasing the Trump approach here. Look, Cruz, he tried to couch it in that answer, but I characterize it as trashing ethanol. Maybe people think that's, overselling it. But ultimately, here is a guy who basically decided, look, no, I want to get rid of it. Those of you who are familiar with it know that ethanol is not that popular, and people don't like it if it isn't mandated. They don't like it if it isn't subsidized. It's not competitive. It's not subsidized. A lot of people argue it doesn't make sense to keep putting, corn in our cars. This is a product that is basically built by government programs. And if you believe in the free market, you should not say, hooray for ethanol. I think it's really, there are a lot of reasons to object to Iowa going first. There's a lot of reasons that this state should not go first, but a big one is this is a state that is just madly in love on this particular issue because it's so great for local corn growers. And as a result of that, you saw the governor of the state come out. Cruz said that with the governor in the audience, who had basically said, this is a important program for our state, and Cruz has to be stopped and all that stuff. So there are a lot of times where, Cruz might seem like he's being a little too slick or trying to finesse the issue or trying to something like that. This is a case where he is being brave. He's telling people things they don't want to hear, and he deserves a lot of attaboys. And because he's going to be punished by this state so badly for it, I think 49 other states ought to consider that when it comes into time for them to vote.
All right, let's get on to a double-barreled bad martini now. And as good as that answer was for Cruz, he was a little off on a couple other answers. His opening joke about Trump was pretty good. He called himself a maniac, called everybody else fat, ugly, and stupid. And he said Ben Carson is not a good doctor, and now we're done with the Trump portion. That one went over fairly well. But then, since he was at the center podium with Trump not there, he got a lot of the tough questions asked of him, and he was the subject of questions to other people, and he came up with this.
Chris, I would note that the last 4 questions have been Rand, please attack Ted. Marco, please attack Ted. Chris, please attack Ted. Jeb, please attack Ted. Let me just say this.
It is a debate, sir.
Well, no, a debate actually is a policy issue, but I will say this, gosh, if you guys ask one more mean question, I may have to leave the stage.
Jim, you can only go to the unfair question pool probably one time in a season. He's already done that, and the Trump joke there at the end just didn't work.
Yeah, and here I'm wondering if the whole thing had been a setup to get to the Trump joke. If so, he had to move a lot faster because one, no, I don't think that, I don't think all those questions were please attack Cruz. I think that all of the respondents chose to attack Cruz because without Trump on the stage, guess what, Ted Cruz, you're the front runner, right? At least for tonight, you're the de facto front runner. And depending on which poll you're looking at, Cruz is either a front runner or a close second. So you're going to get attacked. That's what happens when you are the lead dog. Everybody's looking behind you, trying to take you down. So it was kind of a strange complaint. When you heard the groaning and booing in the audience, I couldn't tell if it was groaning and booing because they agreed with Cruz, they didn't like the moderators, or because it just kind of struck the audience as whining. But when he says, well, I'm just going to have to walk off this stage, like you're waiting for the bump, but he'd already done his Trump joke. And at one point, because, Jeb Bush had said, oh, Trump's been such a teddy bear to me and things like that. Like one of the observers on Twitter had said, look, let everybody get their canned Trump joke out of the way in like the first 5 minutes. Okay, all right, Trump's not here. Everybody make a joke at his expense. Okay, we're all done. Now we can move on to the actual debate. And it just, he'd already done his Trump joke. It just felt awkward and weird. And Trump, Cruz, yes, he looked really good when he stood up to the moderators in the CNBC debate. I don't think you can say these questions were unfair. And it just came across as whiny, and that's just not a good look for Ted Cruz. No,
not at all. And now the second part, there's a lot of blood on the floor over the issue of immigration. And I thought the moderators had a fairly weak night in certain parts. They started off with the Trump question. There were a lot of horse race questions in the beginning. They took a while to get to policy. At some points, it seemed like they were debating the candidates rather than letting the candidates debate. But there were a couple points of genius, and those were the immigration montages for Cruz and Rubio, and you have to imagine Trump if he had been there, talking about where they used to stand on issues. And those certainly made things very awkward for Cruz and Rubio. Here's the one going back to the Gang of Eight debate with Cruz.
I don't want immigration reform to fail. I want immigration reform to pass. I believe if this amendment were to pass, the chances of this bill passing into law would increase dramatically.
Then Marco Rubio from the 2010 campaign.
First of all, earned path to citizenship is basically code for amnesty. It's what they call it. And the reality of it is this. It is unfair to the people that have legally entered this country to create an alternative pathway for individuals who entered illegally and knowingly did so.
Then Jeb Bush touted his very poorly selling book about immigration reform, and this exchange broke out between him and Rubio.
That is the book where you changed your position on immigration, because you used to support a path to citizenship.
So did you.
Well, but you changed in the book.
So did you, Marco.
But perhaps a couple of the most devastating comments came from Rand Paul, who said during the Gang of Eight debate he tried to add an amendment that would have increased scrutiny of refugees, and
Marco opposed this because they made a deal. He made a deal with Chuck Schumer that he would oppose any conservative amendments, and I think that's a mistake, and I just don't think Marco can have it both ways.
And then what about Cruz in the immigration debate?
I saw Ted Cruz say, we'll take citizenship off the table, and then the bill will pass, and I'm for the bill. The bill would involve legalization. He can't have it both ways.
Jim, I think the forensic team is still working the stage with all the blood evidence there.
I mean, basically all of these answers amount to, I'm out of order, you're out of order, this whole court is out of order, right? Oh, I'm a flip-flopper, you're a flip-flopper. This whole stage is full of flip-floppers. And it would be nice if they all could have said, hey, you know what? There was a time a couple of years ago I was a little more open to either a path to citizenship or a path to legalization or to non-mass deportations. The views of the party have shifted, and my views have shifted with them. And let everybody line up, get wrapped on the knuckles once or twice for deviating from orthodoxy or not coming around fast enough, and just move on with it. Instead of it, but you're right. If they had been the video montage of Donald Trump. They only did like 2.5 hours of the debate, Greg. So I don't know if they would have had time to play all of Donald Trump's contradictory statements and flip-flops. 2, if Megyn Kelly had played that, I mean, would that have not have been a thermonuclear explosion on that stage? Would he have just started screaming bimbo at the top of his lungs and flipped out? It would be like George Brett when he was accused of his bat being pine-tarred or something like that. He just would have jumped up, eyes bulging and screaming. As I said, all of these guys have moved their positions, and it would be nice if they could just kind of address it instead of this, Rubio say, well, when I said I opposed amnesty, I meant I opposed a blanket amnesty, and this bill does not give amnesty to blankets. It was really uncomfortable to watch all these guys trying to pretend they hadn't changed their mind, that they hadn't shifted their position or anything like that. And so by this standard, Trump won by not showing up. Now, somewhere in Fox News, Greg, there is a vault of Trump footage they didn't get to use. That vault will be opened by Geraldo Rivera.
Jim, it's only too bad you couldn't find a site to wager on that. With all those flip-flops going back and forth, you absolutely knew Chris Christie was going to come out with his Washington English Dictionary.
And I did. I actually called it on Twitter like 5 minutes before he does. Like, well, here it comes. At some point he's going to say, I'm tired of this jibber-jabber from legislators talking all their fancy parliamentary procedures. I'm all about it. And naturally he did, because, we can't be bothered to actually let people debate policy. That's too boring for the Jersey guys.
Although, in fairness, I don't remember him mentioning he was a prosecutor, and I don't think we heard about Kasich's mailman dad. So, there's a little bit of progress.
A couple people lost bingo last night.
On to the crazy martini now. And we don't talk about the undercard debates much. We did after the first one because Carly Fiorina did so well. But we mention it now only because two members of the undercard debate, and in fact the last two Republicans to win the Iowa caucuses, Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, decided not to stick around for the main debate. They decided to head over across town to the Trump debate that's, for the vets. We'll find out who is actually going to get the money eventually. But ultimately, the question came up at the debate about their decision to go, and Huckabee said this.
Rick Santorum, Donald Trump, and I may be competitors in a presidential race. But tonight, we are colleagues in unison, standing here for the people who let us breathe every breath of free air we breathe, the veterans of the United States of America. Without you, there is no government.
And Jim, obviously, the question about has nothing to do with people's support for the vets. Obviously, we want to support the vets, and hopefully they make a ton of money out of this, and a lot of people get the help that they need out of this. The question is whether they've become willing pawns for the Trump campaign, since they appeared on stage with him with a big Trump sign. And even folks like Eric Erickson today called it kneeling before Zod. So were they just trying to get in front of a camera since it's been so tough for them, or were they useful idiots here?
It would be really, really easy for me to knock around Huckabee and Santorum like a piñata. And I'll get to that. I'm not going to let a target, let that juicy just, walk by. Let me just kind of observe, though. Look, it must be very tough to have been the former governor of Arkansas, the former senator from Pennsylvania. You run for president 4 years ago, 8 years ago. You win the Iowa caucus. It just doesn't come together for you. And you think, well, okay, I'm 4 years older. I'm 8 years older. I can do it better this time. And you try it, and it doesn't go well at all. These guys are both at about 2% in Iowa, where they have spent in almost all of their efforts. It's not going well for them. That must be deeply frustrating. Lash out at the people who endorsed him in the past and aren't endorsing him this cycle. He said they don't really want to solve the problems. They profit from the problems. It's a bitter Mike Huckabee is not a pretty thing to say. However, Trump makes the decision to not participate in the debate. Okay, fine, he can make that call. I think his reasons are, Megyn Kelly's going to be mean to me, isn't particularly good reasoning, but that's fine. The decision to counter-program the Republican debate. Look, the RNC set up this debate schedule. The RNC is supposed to want people to watch the Republican debate, right? This is Reince. This is your show. This is your entire game plan. When one of the candidates says, no, I don't want people to watch that debate, and I'm going to counter-program. I'm going to put on a big event to make sure people don't watch it. Reince, you got to step in on this. Now, you point out that, Reince also made the decision to kick National Review out of the next debate, so people want to add in a grain of salt to my comments, fine. But also, once Huckabee and Santorum jump in, I remember at one point saying anybody who broadcast the Trump event should say you're never broadcasting a Republican presidential debate again. You don't get to distract from the rest of the candidates because you're angry over one of the moderators. But Huckabee and Santorum, arguably because they just wanted to be in front of a camera, arguably because they just wanted to help veterans, pretty much signed off on this. And I think it is not a good sign for them. I think Eric Erickson's kneel before Zod line is really good because I think I thought of it around the same time. And stuff like that makes you want to say to Huckabee and say, why are you still here? It's not happening for you. You're not going to win. You're probably going to have a very embarrassing result on Monday night. Why not get out and endorse somebody? And based on what we saw last night, Greg, it seems reasonable to conclude that the ardent pro-life social conservatives, Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, are going to endorse Donald Trump, who's been pro-life for about 10 minutes. Happy weekend, everybody. By showing up last night, I think it looked like a quasi-endorsement, whether or not they intended it that way.
Oh, absolutely. And you got to think if the numbers are anywhere accurate in the polls, they're going to be out by Tuesday or Wednesday anyway. So New Hampshire's not their strong suits. Jim, have a good weekend. Talk to you Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to tune in again Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.